Leaving Lake Macquarie that you can see in the distance, we climb up into the Watagan Mountains. This is a sandstone ridge of the coastal range. Following the dirt tracks and fire trails, we listen, with the windows down, driving slowly. There, the sound of the eastern whipbird. But it's not that simple. Every time we stop and look for the bird, we cannot find it, for its habitat is the dense understory. John Gould stated that this bird is more often heard than seen. But then we run into a little bit of luck, a waterhole, where we have heard that they are seen on a regular basis. There's been a lot of birds at this water point. They're running in the scrub. That looks suspicious. Scratching in the litter, looking for food. A glimpse of the tail. A few white spots on the tip of the rectrices, but reluctant to come into the open. At last, look, there it is. Black crest, olive back, white throat. The eastern whipbird. In 1801, John Latham described this bird as a flycatcher. He had read John Watling's description of the bird, which read as follows. Native name when known. This bird, from a single note, resembles the crack of a coachman's whip, is called the coachman's flycatcher. So Latham continued the flycatcher theme, calling it Musicarpa crepitans. 25 years later, when Viggers and Horsfield were classifying the Australian birds, they changed the genera from Musicarpa to Psophodes, using the Greek sophos or noise. All Psophodes are Australian birds. This genera includes whipbirds and wedgebills. When it comes to the bushbirds of Australia that have crests, there are several. There are the cockatoos and the pigeons, but with the bushbirds, nearly half are made up by the Psophodes. That is, the whipbirds and the wedgebills. The others are the crested shriketit and the crested bellbird. The whipbird is on the coast because it needs water. In contrast, the wedgebills can inhabit the drier areas. But the whipbird likes to have a bath and drink on a regular basis. These birds are insectivorous. They feed mostly off the ground. They want deep litter. And so often you can find them associated with lyrebirds, and if you listen carefully, you can hear a lyrebird calling in the background. These birds mostly feed off the ground, eating arachnids, insects and their larval forms. When I look at an eastern whipbird, I'm uncertain about the sex because they are sexually isomorphic. However, a clue is often given as to the age of the bird by the amount of rufous colouring, so just watch through this video and you'll see some immature birds. The traditional written name for this bird is the coach whipbird, but as coaches have become redundant, so it is now called the eastern whipbird. Species name is olivaceus, after the olive colour, but the common name is the eastern whipbird because it is found on the east coast of Australia. There is a second whipbird on the west side of Australia. Naturally, it is called the western whipbird. The binomial name is Psophodes nigrogalaris, for this western bird has a large black stripe, much wider than the eastern bird, going up over the throat. You may have noticed that this bird has a little bit of molt, so it's lost one of its tail feathers, but the lateral 3 tail feathers have a white spot on the tip. This dense understory is ideal for the whipbird. In its habitat it more hops than flies, so in this environment it's often found amongst other ground birds like the lyrebird. Again you can hear it in the background, but here with different vocalisations. Watch the whipbird crest. You will see that it is up and then occasionally it will go down, so it is a retractile crest, in contrast to the crested pigeons like the spinifex pigeon, where the crest is permanently up. Now coming back to the feeding pattern of these birds, I have mentioned that most of the feeding is done on the ground, but here in this coastal sheoak, black sheoak or Sheoak littoralis, there is a transient divergence to an arboreal feeding pattern, and interestingly it is seed eating. You can see that this whipbird is feeding on the sheoak seed, taking it directly out of the nuts. In the literature it is also suggested that these birds will eat fruit. I have never seen this personally. It is also reported that when they do eat the fruit, to maintain balance while holding fruit in one of the feet, they recline on their tail. This whipbird doesn't have a lot of green on the back. In North Queensland, on the Tableland area, there is a subspecies of the whipbird that looks very much like this, but this bird was photographed in Lake Macquarie. I suspect the minimal green reflects that this is a young bird and the colour has not yet been amplified. Listen to these birds calling. The male gives the whip, and the female, at the end of the male call, gives the chee-chee. The end result sounds like a single bird giving the call, and this is called an antiphonal duet. Another male call, but no response from the female. She is too busy searching for food under the paper bark. In fact, not all male calls are answered. The whipbirds that live in a melaleuca, or paperbark habitat, have a variance of behaviour. Here they spend more time feeding in the tree than on the ground. The paperbark has a very soft bark, so it's easy for them to lift the bark and look for insects. Melaleucas grow in wetland areas, so the feeding behaviour of a whipbird in a marshy area where melaleucas predominate is more arboreal than the terrestrial dominance of feeding within a eucalypt forest for the same bird. We have heard the classic whip call of the whipbird, but are there other sounds? Listen for a frog croaking sound from this bird. In this bird there are subtle variations in colour, particularly with the brown and rufous markings. So this bird is different, and the reason for that is that it's an immature bird. An immature bird with speckling over the white patches on the throat, and here another immature with a small erectile crest. And some detailed shots of immature birds. It may take up to 3 years for the bird to develop its adult plumage. To finish this session on the whipbird, I will put up some acoustic sonograms so you can get an idea of what the calls look like. The introduction to the male song begins with a drawn-out 2.3 kHz call, then a decrescendo forms the whip. The whip is achieved by a decrescendo from 8 to 1 kHz. The female chee-chee peaks at about 1/3 of the peak frequency of the male whip. Here is a recording at Belmont Lagoon. There were two males calling approximately 40 metres apart. The closest bird has the loudest amplitude, and on the last call the female responded only to that bird, and the female call came from the same direction. I cannot find any difference on the sonograms between these two birds, so it's interesting that the female can pick the call of her own monogamous mate. To finish, I will just show you one more sonogram where two males are calling at just a fraction of a second apart, and you can tell how the female only responds to one of the birds. Here is the classification of the Psophodes. The eastern whipbird and the western whipbird live in dense scrubby area where there is eucalypt forest. But the wedgebill is the closest relative, and this is the habitat for the wedgebill, saltbush on the plains of the Aire Basin. There are two wedgebill species, and this is the chirruping wedgebill. I hope you can hear its call above the wind, and just like the whipbird, it has a crest. On behalf of the Plumes of Oz, I would like to thank you for watching this video. We have enjoyed putting it together, and I hope you have enjoyed watching the Psophodes. Further releases of the Australian bushbirds is forthcoming. If you would like to be notified of these releases, subscribe to this channel.